Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have another collection of scary ghost stories. Also something a bit different. Tonight we're going to be doing an art speedrun and showing it on screen. It has been done by the creator Art by Tag. Links to their stuff in the description if you wish to check them out. So instead of the darkness tonight, you get to see the creation of a scary piece of art as it happens. But for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I had this experience while working in 2013. I'm a photographer slash videographer and have landed a gig shooting behind the scenes of upcoming theatre productions. The photos would be used as promotional material for the premiere, which was coming up in a week, so I basically had shot the rehearsal, just the director, actors and myself on the large stage in town. It was cool to see all of the seats empty, and the director puffing away cigarettes and swearing loudly in a place that you would normally see patrons dressed up and having a cultural experience. The play was all set in a beachside house that was built in the middle of the stage. There were several moments in the play in which all of the lights in the beach house were turned off, plunging everything into darkness, only leaving the emergency exit signs alight, pulling you out of the theatre experience and reminding you that after all, it's just a play. Every time this happens, I put my camera down and listen to the dialogue in the darkness. The third time this happened, the flick of the lights, the darkness, I again put down my camera and patiently started to wait for my next shot opportunity. As I stood there, I started seeing some greyish being illuminated by the emergency sign light. All of the actors and directors were to the right of me. There wasn't supposed to be anyone to my left, but I decided to turn and say hi to whoever was with me so we could exchange silent greetings to not disturb the performance of the actors. So I turned. What I saw has never left my mind to this day and has made me rethink my skeptic outlook towards such things. There stood a young girl wearing a dress. Her hands were outstretched towards me, but not in a way that you'd think she would grab me, but in a way as if begging for something. Her palms facing up, her fingers barely curled, her face was full of tiredness, grief and despair. Her legs weren't there, she was just slowly moving towards me, perhaps floating, I don't know. It was very smooth and gentle. You could imagine with the level of detail I recall her, I must have made eye contact with her for at least 2 to 3 full seconds, which to me felt like an eternity. After the third second, when I was finally able to unfreeze myself and react, what I saw was so vivid, and so there, I instinctively turned my head away and swiped with my hand in her direction, as if to protect myself from the imminent collision between us, not letting out a peep as to not embarrass myself in front of the theatre people. I lit up the monitor of my camera with shaking hand and pointed it in the direction of the girl. But she was gone. I continued to work with my eyes darting everywhere and wonder what the hell just happened to me. I really wanted to speak to the theatre staff about my experience, but I never did in fear of being ridiculed and potentially losing future gigs. I never made sense of this. Maybe some of you can. Back in 2007, I partook in a theatre workshop which took place over the course of a weekend. We would use the stage for all the thespian-related activities by day and sleep on it, using mattresses and sleeping bags by night. The theatre building in question wasn't all that old and had previously served as part of a hospital, but could nonetheless offer 2 ghost stories to its lore. One was related to a supposedly unremovable, queer, somewhat heart-shaped spot on the stage. According to legend, the spot came to be there because of a Shakespearean-level misunderstanding-based murder during the Napoleonic Wars. The story goes that a mill once stood upon its ground. Not all of the Napoleon troops were gentlemen, and one of them broke into the mill and raped the miller's wife. Upon his return, the miller was informed of this and promptly challenged who he thought to be the soldier in question to a duel. The miller won, the soldier died. However, as it turned out, the miller had accidentally challenged the wrong man, and the now dead soldier only accepted the challenge out of a sense of honor. the same honor the rapist was lacking, which is why he'd already fled. Therefore, the miller's deed was a murder committed out of love, which is why, or so I'm told, the stain on the stage resembles the shape of a heart. The stain has supposedly been there since the building's construction in 1920. It's mostly a story, but I do have to admit that spot is a tad eerie. Add to that the experience that my brother and one of the employees of the theatre had while sleeping alone on stage. Ominous knocking sound, waking up a foot away from where they'd fallen asleep, and even a slight glow emanating from the spot whenever a play involving a loved-based murder is played. Though the latter one might be attributing to light errors. It has been stated that the stain has never been successfully removed, but I'm not sure if that's true. The other potential supernatural occurrence, and the one that I can lend a bit more credibility to, is related to the man who was in charge of the theatre for many years but sadly passed away in 2006. The man's name was Stefan Müller. By now you probably realize the story takes place in Europe, or rather Germany to be precise. Anyway, this man was very passionate about his job, and his motto was, "Not everything is theatre. But without theatre, everything is nothing." I met him once or twice during my childhood, since my brother and sister both performed at the theatre when they were teenagers. As I previously said, my brother and I partook in theatre workshop during a weekend in 2017. I had heard of the stain story before, but my brother had recently told me about how it sometimes feels as if the spirit of Herr Stefan Müller is still wandering the theatre seats at night, as he had done during so many years of his lifetime. He had, after all, directed many plays, and would most likely remain in the viewers section, observing the performances and give advice, and sometimes of the humorous kind, on how to improve on what he saw. He was a fair director who would know how to direct children and teenagers the right way, without either being condescending or spoiling them. It would seem to me that a man so good at his craft would have a reason to haunt the halls he once occupied so frequently. The first night was not really uneventful, but rather went unnoticed due to my body being sleep-deprived the few previous days. I fell asleep the moment my butt hit the mattress, therefore I shall skip the assortment of unimportant, yet, as always, queer dreams and talk about the night from Saturday to Sunday. I tried to get to sleep, however I was prevented from doing so. Then I tried to concentrate my breath, as it would surely supply me with peace and calm. However, to my dismay, this exercise merely resulted in me noticing a noise that had previously escaped my attention, due to all my relentless shifting. An almost rhythmic tapping sound, slow, resembling the steps of a man caught up in his thoughts. I wasn't certain whether or not my ears were playing tricks on me, but it sounded as if these tapping sounds came straight from the seating area. The story of Herr Müller's haunting freshened my mind. My heart rate began to accelerate. I desperately tried to ignore the tapping and just drift off into slumber, but it was useless. The tapping was relentless. Not really loud, not really quiet enough to be disregarded as white noise. It was as if it had always been there, like a small spiderweb glistening with raindrops ready to catch a fly, if only it would take notice. Now it had gotten me into its semi-hypnotic strings of sound. I furthermore noticed the tapping seemed to change position at a suspiciously walk-like pace, from the right end of the auditorium to the left. Then, I could have sworn it was approaching my position. It came closer, and I tried to breathe calm, only to realize that I had held my breath for the last 30 seconds. The step-like noise came closer until they were mere feet away, and then they would stop approaching and instead move beneath the edge of the stage. I opened my eyes and was greeted by darkness of my surroundings. The auditorium had blinds, which had been lowered to help everyone sleep better. I do have to admit, to my shame, that until the age of 15 I'd slept with a nightlight, and even after, I still never shut the blinds because I'm not fond of awakening to total darkness, especially when I'm still in a daze of half-dreaming, given the bizarre, uninvited visions it brings. It was precisely this kind of darkness that greeted me and made it near impossible to see anything. It took a while, but after a few seconds I started to make out crude shapes of seats. This, however, was only true of the first few rows. The rest of the auditorium was bathed in impenetrable darkness. The noise continued, so I decided to get up and leave the backstage to use the lavatory. I calmed down as I entered the backstage area, which was faintly lit by an exit sign. I entered the toilet and was blinded right after using the light switch. During my business, I calmed down even more and reasoned with my mind that what I had heard must have obviously been nothing more than something being knocked against the outer wall by wind. I decided to return to the stage to sleep. I would walk towards the noise to find its origin, though, and I walked back onto the stage, up the small staircase which would normally allow the actors to descend the stage without jumping off the edge. But before I even considered walking down, I stopped. The noise still kept wandering, and I couldn't see anything beyond the first row. I kept on staring into the void, my breath filled with nervousness, my body ever so slightly shaking. I'm not certain just how long I stood there, feeling scared by the darkness and the noise to further advance. After a while, I decided to go back to my sleeping bag and tried to embrace Morpheus's arms once more. The next morning when I awoke, I didn't hear the tapping sound anymore. Just as well. I volunteer at our local little theatre quite often, one that's fairly new. The building is less than 30 years old, but being full of actors and creative types, I am sure dramatic souls would be attracted to stay or visit. A few things have happened here that I thought would be of interest. The first one happened during a run of Hairspray. I was the female authority figure, a fun comedic role that got to have a mic but not much stage time. Two things happened during a show that shook everyone up. During the first act, I am chilling in the costume room when the stage manager comes running around frantically checking all the mics to see which one was accidentally turned on. Apparently, the audience was hearing a woman talk over the speakers. These were brand new mics that could only be turned on at the sound booth, and the sound booth had already verified that nothing was on that shouldn't be. It eventually stopped after saying things like, "Hang on a minute, I'll be right there." Us cast all blamed each other until we heard that none of them were on. Then someone pointed out that the former president of the theatre had passed away that week, and a few audience members who knew her said it sounded just like her. Fast forward to the final scene. I don't have to come on stage again until bows, but I like to sit off stage at the piano bench in the right corner near the curtains, out of sight but in range of all the ceiling mics, lending my voice to the final song. Lots and lots of dancing for everyone else on stage. You can't stop the beat. We always called it "You Can't Stop to Breathe," so every voice was needed. I'm happily singing, sitting with my back to the wall, when I hear as clear as day, and louder than my own voice, a high-pitched woman singing, but a different song that I couldn't quite catch the words to right in my ear. I had never met the woman who had recently passed, but when I later told the cast, they all said she was a soprano. That corner used to have a really negative energy to it, but never again after that night. We think she stopped by to join in one last show before going to the light, and in the process, cleansing that area. All activity like that stopped after we took down the stage light traditionally left on after a theatre member has died. A few months later, I'm helping decorate for a production of 1776, and needed to find a candle holder for the room that I was working on. They were in a room called Prop Heaven, and I'd never been there before, so some of the stagehands took me up and turned all the lights on. It was the top floor over the second building the theatre uses for smaller productions, and it reminded me of a crowded thrift shop with a big square pathway through all the stuff because they didn't have the AC turned on that night. I expected them to stay with me, but the head guy said to the other that they had to get back to work and to just find them next door, and when I was done I could go lock up again. The other guy looked worried and said, "What about the angels?" I whipped back around from my rummaging and said, "What angels?" The head guy laughed and they left, so I'm sure they were trying to mess with me or something. So I tried to finish as fast as I can. I'm hunting and needed 2 matching ones, and was only finding single candle holders that were too modern looking for tea lights. I'm getting frustrated and kind of groan out loud. Then get a sudden urge to check a totally different area that had baskets or something odd. And sure enough, there were two perfect, wall-mounting, old-fashioned ones, exactly like what I was hoping to find. I grab them, and out loud I say, "Oh, thank you." Now keep in mind I'm the only person in this entire building. The door is closed. There's no AC on, and I did not turn it on. It was stifling hot, no air movement at all, and about 10 seconds after I utter my thanks to the theatre gods as a whole, a set of wind chimes from the far right begins to chime loudly. I try to brush it off as a coincidence, or the guy's messing with me, but I start to take the other direction to the door, to the opposite of the room from me. I'm turning the final corner when I hear a huge crash from the middle of the room, but nothing had fallen or appeared to have moved. That's when I bolted and ran down the stairs. I ran so fast, where I found the two guys busily holding up a wall that was being attached to the lines that rise the scene up and down, as well as every other person there that night. I never did work up the nerve to say anything beside the fact that I was done, but I've asked others about the angels up in prop heaven, and everyone gets slightly nervous and changes the subject. It didn't feel mean. I'm pretty sure it helped me find the prop I needed, but I won't go up there again without others staying with me next time. I'm a custodian at a local high school. My shift is from 4 p.m. to midnight. We have a pretty large performing arts centre, and I honestly hate cleaning it at night because it's always dark when I go in, and I have to search around with my phone's flashlight until I get the light switches. In the back of the PAC, there's a classroom, 2 bathrooms, and a makeup/costume room, where there are at least 8 mirrors, each on both sides of the room facing each other, creating an infinity mirror. It terrifies me to go in there and look in there most of the time. My first experience happened when I was out with a coworker. He's more sensitive to energies and feels them right away, whereas I don't really notice shifts in them unless they are pointed out, or they are majorly different and noticeable. We walked into the makeup room, and he stopped and said, "Did you feel that? The energy changed." I told him no, but then I left and came back into the room maybe 5 minutes later, and since I was already thinking about it, I instantly picked up on a deep feeling. It was heavier in the atmosphere than when I walked in. I described it, and he agreed that's what he felt too. Off and on I'll hear things rattle like doors and things around the back of the buildings where the makeup room is, and I'll feel uneasy. But it wasn't until I had my fiancée start working with me yesterday that things got more pronounced. She used to be a Wiccan, and had dealt with a lot of paranormal and demons who stayed with her for years, and on top of that she's an empath, so she's more susceptible to energy shifts and entities. I made the mistake of talking about the weird feeling and sounds I get when I'm in there while we were cleaning the back of the PAC. And while she was walking around, she said she felt something brush her back. We also walked through the doorway to the bathroom, and it got significantly colder, even though we were in there not long prior, and it felt the same temperature as the other rooms. When she pointed it out, we were talking about it, and I started hearing small voices, and I couldn't tell if it was just in my head, or if the squeaky door I was leaning against was doing it. But I told her to stop talking, and I stopped moving the door, and then I heard it for a second too. We left, and had my coworker come in and help us after he was done. He left the building with us across the room, and by the time we got to the hallway to the door, we felt cold for a second, and then everything went back to a regular temperature. People tell me a whole load of stuff, but I have no idea on what it is. All that I know is that it terrifies me. When I was younger, I was heavily involved in young people's theatre. I grew up in the city of Bath, where most of my childhood was spent at the Royal Bath's Youth Theatre. Most of the plays we did were performed in the theatre studio space. Occasionally we were allowed to do a show on the main house stage, as the studio theatre became more popular for small live events. We had to perform shows at other venues in the city. One venue was the Rondo Theatre, located a little ways out of the main city in an area called Lark Hall. I was invited to act in a student production of a Greek play, which, as is often the case with small-scale theatre productions, was incredibly behind with technical rehearsal. My best friend at the time, a guy who went by the name of Sonic, was the lighting designer and operated for the show. He had decided that to get the lighting design complete in time for the final dress rehearsal, he needed to spend the night in the theatre after everyone else had left. He brought a sleeping bag with him so that he could take the occasional nap in the lighting box. When I showed up the next morning, I inquired as to how it had gone. He told me he got a lot done, but when he tried to sleep, he couldn't. When he came to a point where his focus was dwindling and tiredness was setting in, he laid down for a nap. Throughout the entire night, he was kept awake by the sound of footsteps walking up and down the stairs in the building. He had made sure the building was completely locked up after everyone else had left, so there was no way anyone would be in there. Something worth mentioning is that all the flooring was incredibly creaky. During the show, myself and another actor finished our last scenes and were going to the dressing rooms to wait for our curtain call. The exit from the right side of the stage led to a small corridor with a fire exit to the left and a staircase to the right. The staircase spiraled up, and the single dressing room ran the entire floor space above the stage. During this show, we discovered that walking across the dressing room floor could be heard on the stage and in the auditorium, so we agreed that during the show, we were not going to go into the dressing room when off stage. I returned to the theatre some years later to do another show. The director was new to the space, so I informed her of the noise issue from the dressing room. She made the decision that we should keep everyone on stage in some pretentious, edgy style to keep us from going into the dressing room and causing noise distraction. Before we started rehearsing for the play, I had purchased a brand new Discman. Yes, this was a while ago now, and as with all new toys, I was concerned about getting it stolen if it was left in the dressing room. As the only access to the dressing room was via the stage and the side exit door, all I had to do was ensure the door remained locked from the inside at all times, which I checked on frequently. During our first dress rehearsal, I was alarmed to hear the sound of footsteps walking across the dressing room above the stage. I was on the stage, but in a position where I could walk off and not impact the rehearsal. The director might be getting annoyed, but I was willing to risk that for the sake of the £100 Discman I could potentially lose. Everyone who was involved in the show was accounted for, which meant that whomever was above us had to have been an unknown, potentially one of the thieves we had been warned about by the theatre manager. As I was in this situation where I could not walk away from the rehearsal altogether, I turned to one of the assistant stage managers and told her to check that the side door was still locked and then check the dressing room for an intruder. Surprisingly, she went ahead and did so. When she got back, she informed me there was no one there. Then we heard it again, clear sounds of someone walking back and forth in the dressing room. I told her to check again, and this time check the bathrooms and showers and make sure no one was hiding. Apprehensively, she went up the stairs, and she returned a second time and told me again that she saw nothing. The footsteps started again. I insisted she go back and check one more time, but at this point she was too freaked out and refused to return. I had to go back on stage for a scene, and after a short while, the sound ceased. After rehearsal, I went upstairs expecting to find the dressing room ransacked. There was nothing, no sign of theft, no sign of anyone having been there. Eventually, I moved to Essex to study at university. 7 or 8 years later, I returned to Bath and met up with a guy who went on to become my best friend. He had studied theatre in Bath, and we were planning on getting some projects going together. We started talking about the paranormal, and he mentioned the Rondo Theatre. Years after I had my experiences, he had similar ones when doing shows there. At one point, he had inquired with the manager of the theatre, who didn't give him any specifics, but did acknowledge that strange things did occur. I worked at a camp on an island in Lake Ontario in New York this summer, and I've been busy. but I just now decided to post about what happened. There was an old abandoned theatre that was lost in weeds and overgrown plants. Me and some friends decided to explore it, and I have videos of us exploring the theatre, but I'm not sure I want to share them. But anyway, while exploring, a lot of strange things were happening. We went back and explored it several times, and each time we went back, something strange would happen. The first incident, my friend Griff and I found a secret hatch to go under the stage. As soon as we opened it, the temperature dropped drastically. All that was under the hatch was an enclosed room with a ton of spiders and damp ground. See, that's not the scary part. The scary part is what we heard next, which is unfortunately nothing original. We heard footsteps, loud, distinct, and extremely clear, coming from way up in the attic, where the bell tower was. It was a town hall converted into a theatre in the late 50s, and has been abandoned since the 70s. While exploring the building in the actual bell tower, I wanted to ring the bell, so I went to the crawl space, pushed my way through towards the bell, and the ceiling was broken in spots, and I could see the auditorium below me. But I got into a position where I could stand a bit, and I swear I've never seen anything like this. I saw a ball of light. But not like normal, just white light. It was grey in the middle, and greyish blue towards the sides, with a ring of light around it. I swear it looked like it had a 3-foot diameter. It started at the bell, which was 15 foot in front of me, and it zipped right past my leg. Obviously every single hair of mine was standing up straight. Then it zipped back towards the bell and disappeared halfway back. It happened in seconds, but I remember it like yesterday. I wasn't the only one who saw it. One of my co-workers was right beside me and swears the same thing. My friend Kim, she can be a little superstitious. Kim and I visited the building on our last visit, and in total we've come maybe 5 times. We were walking around re-exploring the thing that we had already seen. We were there to scavenge and find old newspapers and school stuff to take home. She kept saying she could see a dark figure. Every time she said that, I would laugh and shake it off, but she only got more serious about it. We ended up leaving, because we got creeped out, and I remember her talking to me later about the shadow thing she kept seeing, but I blew it off again. That is until we started going through our pictures we'd taken that day. She took 2 photos that specifically stood out. I have no idea what they are. They could be glare or I don't know. It looks to me like a figure coming down the stairs. It's the same figure in the auditorium. Tell me, what do you think of these pictures? I've worked at the cinema for 5 years. After a year or so, I spoke to one of the managers, Andy, and told him that Scream 4 sometimes give me the creeps. He paled and told me he felt the same way, but never told anyone because he was terrified they'd take the piss. We both sometimes got this weird feeling in there, as if someone was watching. At times when I've been cleaning in there, I've seen a shadow slowly move across the room at the front, as if someone is walking past, but of course there's no one there. I've since found out several people have seen this too. About a year later, I was talking to another manager, Dee, while on close. Dee told me she hates being in Scream 4 when we're closed too. When we close the building, we place Clark bars on the fire exits in order to secure the doors. The bar is kind of U-shaped, and they go upwards, into a slot at each end. It is then secured by a big pin going through the slot and the end of the bar. Inside Scream 4, we have a door at each side with fire exits, and there is a fire exit in the corridor near Scream 4. So Dee told me that years ago, she shut down projection in Scream 4, put the bars on the fire exits inside Scream 4, and put the bar on the corridor and walked away. When she got to the top of the corridor, she heard a clatter sound and looked around. She saw the bar was back on the floor halfway up the corridor. Dee said she didn't get freaked out at the time, she just put the bar back and carried on. I refused to believe Dee at first, because I was convinced she was trying to scare me, seeing as we were on closing shift together. She swore she was telling the truth. I hesitantly believed her. During the next few days, I asked the other managers if they'd ever heard Dee's story, but they hadn't, so I quietly decided Dee was pranking me, and thought no more of it. Fast forward a few years and Andy was on the closing shift with a couple of guys called Josh. One of them was training as a manager, so he went with Andy to shut down the projection in Screen 4, while the other Josh puts the bar on Screen 1, which is basically on the other side of the building and on another floor. Andy and trainee Josh put the bar on the corridor near Screen 4 before going into the projection box and doing the other 2 bars. When they came out, they saw the bar from the corridor was on the floor and to the side of it, so it didn't just fall off because it would have fallen down. Andy was convinced the other Josh was trying to mess about with them because they knew Dee's story, and they asked him over the radio, but he said he was nowhere near Screen 4 because he'd been busy at Screen 1. Andy didn't believe him, so he put the bar back on, and the 3 of them went into the office and looked at the CCTV. They saw the bar just come off and fly to the side. At this point, Andy was freaking the hell out, so they set the alarm and got out of there. Andy was working the next day and was telling the people on shift about it and went to show them the CCTV footage, only to find it had erased itself, only for that camera in that time frame. The other main story that my coworker Rob loves to share is the one that we refer to as the Amos ghost. So one time he was on shift when another coworker, Amos, scared him by hiding around the corner saying his name. Amos has got quite a distinctive voice. It's very easy to recognize him. Rob laughed it off and didn't think much else of it. A day or so later, Rob and I were on shift when someone else called Kim, who came down the stairs to Till's and said, "Is Amos here? I just heard him say my name." We were confused because he definitely wasn't on shift, and we hadn't seen him come in to watch a film or anything. We would have known if he was there because one of us would have had to process an employee pass on the tills. Kim said she was walking down the corridor and she heard Amos's voice quite close to her calling her name a few times. At this point, Rob had been reading up on spirits imitating people's voices, and he totally believes in the Amos ghost. A few days after Kim heard Amos, when he wasn't in the building, another girl called Emma had a similar experience in the same corridor. If I remember correctly, she said she heard his voice fairly close to her ear whispering, "Emma, Emma," a few times. She then heard about what happened to Kim. So spooked, she ran to the tills where Rob was and told her about it. After she finished telling him, all the radios started blasting out static, which creeped them out further. Rob still gets really scared to think of this at any point. I know he believes it and scares himself further reading up on this kind of stuff. I'm not sure at all. When it comes to the static of the radio, that could have just been interference. But any thoughts or comments would be welcome as to what's happening at the movie theatre. I live in a small, quiet town in England, quite rural. The town itself houses a couple of thousand people, and one of the main hotspots is our old antique movie theatre. It's nearly 100 years old, I'm guessing, still with original seating and everything, though it has been refurbished a few times. I usually work the late shift, and it takes 2 of us to close up and make sure everything is in order. It just so happened that my partner that day happened to leave early because he was feeling really unwell. It being quite a chill night, a Tuesday evening, I told him that I'd be fine by myself. I can't remember which movie was playing, but as it was coming to its conclusion, I was doing all the things we had to do right before we locked the place up for the night. Right now, I was sweeping up popcorn from the entry hall. When the movie ends, people leave, and as you can imagine, it gets dirty all over again. About 20 minutes later, right when I lock the doors and make sure everyone has left, I get my leaf blower and start clearing away all the popcorn and food debris left on the floor by our lovely patrons, oh so considerate. I'm just playing music out of my phone speaker, not really thinking of anything with all the lights turned on and minding my own business, when all of a sudden I hear footsteps. Pronounced footsteps, like an angry mum coming to give me a scolding after something I've done wrong. I perk up and look towards the set of double doors. I can't see anyone through them, so I make my way towards the doors to find out who the hell is in here. It's only when I'm halfway to the doors that I remember that this place is locked up, and that's when I sort of freeze, but the footsteps carry on coming my way. They definitely sound like women's boots or heels or something. That distinct clickety-clack. I push open the doors and I'm met with nothing. The moment I do so, the sound stops completely, and I look around the empty hallway, which 10 minutes ago had been my boring-ass workplace, which was now the most terrifying place on earth. I look around the corners, expecting to see some sort of demon lash out and rip my soul from my body, or a disembodied scream, but there's nothing, and no one. I turn back around, get my leaf blower and carry on working. And that's it for the night. A few months later, I hadn't told anyone my story. Again, I was closing up. We had just finished for the night, the film was over, and my partner was doing all that counting and stuff with money that you do that I'm not very good at, when the cinema closes. I'd finished blowing and sweeping away all the popcorn. It had been a fairly clean night, and right as I was turning things off in the projector room, do I hear a small child laugh. I just about crap myself when I turn around. Another situation where I think there's no way anyone can be here at 12:45 at night. I look, and to my horror, I see a brief flash and hear what sounds like footsteps running down out of the projector room. It takes me a few seconds to even register what's happened and slowly start walk towards the stairs. I look down and clearly see no one. I just about had it at that point. I didn't really know what to do and couldn't tell my partner because he'd think I was afraid. So I slowly lock up and walk down the stairs. I have a blank expression on my face, and just as my partner's finishing up and I'm handing him the key, he goes, "Hey, what's up? You look pretty spooked." I tell him it's nothing, and he kind of gets that something happened. He then whispers, "Did you see something?" I give him a shy nod, and he goes, "Oh, that's okay. I've seen them too." As I said, this is a small town, and we walk in vaguely the same direction for the first 7 or so minutes, so as I'm walking through the empty streets with him, he tells me his own experience in the theatre. Apparently, a number of years ago, as he'd been working there longer, he saw a full-bodied apparition of a child standing in a doorway, well past midnight. He ran to them, but the moment he reached where they were no longer there. He said it freaked him out so bad, he ran out the theatre, locked it and left, just to be scolded by the manager the next morning, who has apparently never seen anything. We both agreed to keep it to ourselves, and still, there are times where I just get that uneasy feeling while at work. The feeling that something is there, watching me. We have a theatre in our town that was built in the 1930s, and, as is tradition, there are plenty of stories of people noticing strange cold spots, things in the green room having been moved, and the occasional whisper on someone's ear, and things like that. However, there have been no reported sightings for years, until my daughter started spending more time there with me. She's sensitive to these things. Her first sighting was one night where there were only 3 of us up in the bio box. She got there and went out to the auditorium. A few minutes later she comes back and casually says, "I saw the ghost down in the green room." I asked if that's why she left the room, and she said yes, that she saw something white go past the auditorium door and got a feeling, so I went to have a look. She said she saw a lady in long, old-fashioned white dress in the women's dressing room, standing in front of the mirror, like she was putting makeup on, but she didn't reflect. I asked that specifically. A few weeks ago we were there to see a show, and when the house lights went down there was a voiceover and sound effects in the darkness. So they were down for 30 seconds or so, and she whispers to me, "Is someone on the stage? Oh, never mind, it's just her." She said she saw her standing downstage center, right in front of the stage, and she faded away when the stage lights came up. I've asked around since, and a few people have said they've seen her as well, but only once each. I myself have spent many nights alone in that place programming lights and have never seen a thing, although sometimes I feel like I'm not alone. I never really get creeped out either. So that's good, I guess. Throughout the 2000s, I was part of a tiny, independent theatre company with zero funding. Every show we did came out of our own pockets, so we needed a venue that would let us work for cheap. We found one in a local historic theatre. This place was mostly a music venue, but they had a tiny theatre upstairs, and the owners were awesome. We were allowed to rehearse for free, and just pay a small fee each performance night. We did so many Shakespeares with loud music, usually metal coming through the floor. Hamlet's soliloquies accompanied by corn. It was quite the sight to see. This place also had a documented history of hauntings. Several of us had small experiences here and there, knocking, things falling over, disappearing from where they were put. Nothing that couldn't be explained away by the chaos of rehearsal, except perhaps the feeling of perpetually being watched. One summer night, we were rehearsing in the upstairs bar area. The owners were great to us, but couldn't afford to turn on the AC, so it was very hot. There were hanging curtains separating the bar from the storage area behind it, and I watched casually as someone started to push through them. There was a very clear human outline that stood there, pushing out the curtains for 10 to 15 seconds, then it slowly, clearly backed away. I was the only one who saw it. I thought it was odd, obviously, to stand with your face in a curtain for that long, but it wasn't unusual for the cleaning staff to be there this late, and I assumed one of them had to stop and think. Perhaps they had forgotten something and returned to the kitchen. But who does that? Who stands like that and then backs away instead of turning around like a normal person? Someone who's messing with us. It was just too weird. When the scene was over, I asked if anyone else was in the building. No, the staff left 2 hours ago and given the director the keys to lock up. I asked if the AC was on and everyone laughed. But when I told them what I saw, we all listened anyway. The AC was loud. It definitely wasn't on. We chalked it up to the theatre ghost and moved on. After that, I started talking to him when I was alone and felt watched. I told him he was creeping me out, and he'd back off. He still messed with us for years after that, once stealing a prop that had already been placed and confirmed by several people in the middle of the show, but he wasn't so bad for a ghost. I always heard that there was more than one ghost there, and sometimes the watching did feel malevolent. But the guy who felt familiar tended to show up and run the other one off. Or maybe that was just me creeping myself out. But on that night, I definitely saw something I couldn't explain away. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you did like to see the creation of the artwork. I personally found it really cool. For those veterans of the channel who've been here a while, you may remember that my old artist Angeliki did this for me about 3 or 4 years ago now. You know, I used to have a few of these videos with the artwork playing in the background as it's created. In fact, I have one more that I never actually used, which I think would be pretty cool to share. So if you guys like this, let me know and I might show her final art piece to you all. But it depends on what you guys say. I know a lot of you will say, or have said already, there's no black screen, I have trouble sleeping, and I get it. But I hope that you can appreciate this as a separate, one-off, standalone video, one-time kind of deal. Alright then guys, well thank you so much for listening. You know it means the world to me and I love you all so much. Thank you. I hope to see you again in the week for another video, but if you want to hear more, links on screen for you to check out now. You guys are amazing. Seriously, stay awesome. See you in the next one.